Hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, we're installing a helical cutter head in the DeWalt DW735 planer. Well, I've been sitting on the fence for this one for a long time, only because these helical spiral cutter heads for the 735 planer are very expensive. And I really didn't know if it was worth it. And I hemmed and hawed and hemmed and hawed. And I was even talking to a viewer who had installed one in his planer and was quite happy with it. But all in all, I ended up pulling the trigger on one because it went on sale for well over $200 off the regular price that they were asking. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to show you guys how to install this cutter head, and we'll see how I like it at the end. Now this spiral cutter head is by Craftex in their CX series, which is a Canadian company of tool manufacturers, and it's the CX 735 spiral, in case you're wondering on the model number. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to crack this open. I haven't even opened the box yet. This thing arrived at my door last week and I haven't had the chance to open it yet. So we'll just check inside to make sure everything is all right before we start the installation. And it looks well packaged in styrofoam to protect it. We have a manual. This is the cutter head. I'm not going to mess with that just yet. We have a couple of bearings. We have some screws for the helical blades. We have this little package here, which is a set of 5 spare blades, I guess in case you chip one or what have you. We have our T-wrench, and what do we have here? Looks like we have a worm gear here. So let's get into the assembly or to the installation of this cutter head. Well, the very first thing that we have to do is we have to gain access to the stock cutter heads. So we will remove the top dust cover by taking out these 4 screws here. And then we can remove the dust collection shroud here. You'll do that by removing these 3 thumb screws here, the longer red thumb screws. We will remove these, and then all you need to do is right here at the top, it says open or close, and you just rotate your dust shroud to the open position and you can slide it right out at that point. The next step will be to remove the crank wheel, and this can be accomplished by removing the center bolt using the torque wrench that came with your planer. With that crank wheel removed, it provides us access to these 4 torque screws. Again, you can use the supplied wrench with your planer and remove all 4 torque screws, and that will remove this right side cover. So we now need to remove the left side cover, and it's just 3 Torx bolts, the same wrench that we've been using. We now need to remove the snap rings from the front and the rear rollers, and you can use a pair of snap ring pliers for this. If you don't have one or a set of pliers, I mean, you can use a screwdriver, but honestly, the right tool for the right job, these snap ring pliers are dirt cheap at places like Princess Auto. So grab yourself a pair of snap ring pliers and remove both the front and the rear wheel snap rings. And for those of you that don't know, this is what snap rings look like. As well as the snap rings, we need to remove this top spring here. So just a pair of needle nose pliers. You can gently pull it off the tensioning lever there and just let it hang on the bolt. And we can now remove our sprockets and our chains from our shafts. So we'll just take this off here, just like that. And we can also remove our spacer for our one sprocket gear. Now here on the right side of the planer, we need to remove this spring here from our tensioning arm. We could just use needle nose pliers for that, and again just let it carefully hang there. And then using a Phillips screwdriver, we will remove the tensioning arm. We now need to remove both sprockets, front and rear, and the chain from the right side of the planer. But these torques here are a T25, so you will need a T25 to remove those. No big deal, but either way, let's get those sprockets and the chain removed. We now need to remove our pulley belt now, but it's locked, so it's very difficult to remove. You want to reach inside and press your cutter lock head release. That's right here on the left side of the planer, and then from there you'll be able to work your belt off of your cutter head. Well, at this point, we need to remove all of our blades and our blade retainers. So in order to do that, you will have to remove all of these torques on all three blades. There are 8 in total across each blade, so remove all 24 bolts, all 3 blades, and all 3 blade retainers. And for those of you that don't know, this DeWalt T-wrench, the Torx wrench that they provide with the planer, it has rare earth magnets embedded in the handle. The purpose for that is to take your blade retainers out and to safely remove your blades. Remember guys, these are very sharp, so use the magnets to your advantage. If you've never changed your blades before, again, in order to get to the next set, you just push your release and then you can rotate to the next set of blades and carry on from there. And we now will remove the cutter head lock by taking out these 2 Phillips screws right here on the inside of the planer. We now need to remove the gearbox, and that is this piece over here on the left side of the planer. So we will remove these 3 screws here. Be 1, 2, 3. These hold the gearbox in place. So we can remove all 3, and then I'll show you what to do with it next. Now at this point, your speed selector here, if you spin it to the right towards number 2, you'll see that it's pushing out the gearbox here, just like that. And we can remove our gearbox now. So before you can fully remove your gearbox, there is a retainer here. You will need to use a 5/32 diameter, or sorry, a 5/32 Allen wrench. Remove this retainer here, and then you'll be able to remove your gearbox completely out of your planer. We now need to remove the pinion here from the left side of our planer. And unfortunately though, we've had to remove the lock on our cutter head, so there's no way to lock it. So we're going to wedge a piece of board just down inside here to keep this from spinning. And I've got a 6mm socket here, and we should be able to just break that pinion free by turning it counterclockwise using that 6mm socket, and we should be able to unscrew it and completely remove it from our planer. Now in here as well, along with the pinion, is another snap ring. We can just get a hold of that, compress it, and pull it out. Well, we now need to remove our pulley wheel here. We will also remove the key and the spacer. So for this, we're going to have to wedge our carriage again, and then get in here, loosen off this nut, And from there, we should be able just to pull off the pulley along with our key, which is just that little metal square in there. And as well, there is a spacer. We can remove that as well. And as well in behind, surprise, surprise, we have another snap ring. So we can just compress it like that and remove it. So what they don't tell you is that you will need an M8 bolt in here. It's a metric number 8, and you will secure it in the center where you took your pinion out and then hammer it to get your carriage out of your planer. Well, if your cutter head did not come with new bearings, you now have to remove the old ones from your old cutter head to use on your new helical. This one, however, came with new bearings. So now that you have everything removed here, you want to place this over here is the right side of the planer. You want to place your shaft outside the hole on the right side of the planer, and then we can lower this in place on the left side. Now, truth be told, I removed all of the blades just to make it a little safer to deal with. But now we need to get the bearing installed on the helical shaft. Well, it's now time to install the one bearing, which is the smaller one of our two bearings. I believe this is a number 6202. But either way, we need to get it hammered on to the shaft of the new helical cutter. I have a piece of wood installed on the opposite side to block the cutter head from going back any further. And I just want to get this centered on here. Our M8 bolt will give us something to hold on to. And we're going to get this in place here and just tap it in until it starts to seat onto the shaft of our helical cutter. Now you don't want to use a metal hammer here because you'll damage things. So you want to be using a wooden dowel in my case. Get it lined up, and then you want to install the bearing until it's flush with your housing. So with the bearing on the left side of the planer installed, you can now install the larger right side bearing, which I believe is a 6204. So the same method, using a wooden dowel, we will just tap this in place. Now this one here, you want to drive it in until the seating ring for your snap ring is exposed. So it's going to go in a little further than flush. All right, and that looks pretty good there. One thing you want to keep in mind when you're hammering in these bearings, don't just sit on one side and be wailing away on it. You're going to make it go off kilter and jam in the hole. These are tight-fitting bearings, so you want to work your way around the bearing from the 12 o'clock mark, then 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 12, 3, 6, 9, and keep going around a couple taps at each location until you get the bearing seated the way you want it. So now that both bearings are good, we're happy with the flush one on the right side and this one just past the retention ring groove, we can use our snap ring pliers and put that snap ring back in place. And now on the right side of the planer, we can place our spacer back in there for our belt pulley. We'll place our key for our belt pulley. I'll just turn that so that it's facing upwards. We'll place our pulley back on carefully. And then we can re-secure it with the existing nut. With the belt pulley retaining nut all tightened and everything done on that side, you'll need to drive the smaller bearing on the left side of the planer in far enough to expose the snap ring retaining groove around the outside. From there, you can use your snap ring pliers and reinstall the snap ring on the left side of the planer. Now this helical cutter comes with a new pinion gear. So I'm just going to use it instead of the existing. So again, with the number or with the 6mm socket, we're just going to tighten our pinion gear into the end of our cutter head. And at this point we can put our belt back on to our cutter head pulley. And at this point now we can reinstall our gearbox, making sure to put that pin back in with the 5/32 Allen wrench. So I'll get this pin reinstalled and then we can reinstall the gearbox. Now I called it a retaining pin, but really it's what shifts the gears and changes the speeds in your planer. So you may need to finagle with your speed control in order to get it in properly. And then we'll take our Torx wrench that came with the planer and tighten our gearbox back in place. Alright, and now we can put the spacer on the left hand side for our gear, or our sprockets and our chain, and we can reinstall our sprockets here on our shafts. And once we get them lined up and where we want them, then we can put our snap rings back in place to retain that chain and those sprockets exactly where they're supposed to be. And now we can reattach our spring on the left side of the planer here onto our chain tensioner, and just make sure that that lines up there. And that looks good. We're back in business on the gearbox side of things anyway. And while everything's apart, I took a bit of opportunity to grease the chain a little bit, and now we can put our gearbox cover back on to our planer. And over here on the right side of the planer, we are going to secure our sprockets and our chain again back on these shafts. I'll probably take the opportunity to grease that chain up as well, and we can secure them with the screws that came with it in the first place. And then we can place our idler arm back on to our assembly. And this of course keeps the tension on the chain, so we can use our needle nose pliers and we will place our spring back onto our idler arm. Just like that. And now we can replace the cover on our pulley side. And now at this point we can reinstall our crank. And that is pretty much it there, boys and girls. I'm going to put all the blades back on the helical cutter. Don't forget to put your dust shroud back in with the 3 red T-bolts, and as well be sure, of course, to put on your protective cover. One note here is that the blade lock that we removed that locked the original spindle, it does not get reinstalled because it does not work with the helical cutter, so you can leave that part off. And that is a significant drop indeed from the levels that we had with the straight blades down to a maximum here of 88.8 decibels. Huge difference in noise, that's for sure. I guess we'll see how long these last. And there you have it. The installation of the Craftex CX Series 735 spiral cutter head in the DeWalt DW735 planer. Guys, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. All in all, I started this morning, finished this afternoon, and it took 4 hours. 4 hours to install. And you know what? For me, I have a fully equipped shop, so the small little things that normal people would be missing didn't really bother me. But if you're going to get one of these for your planer, be sure that you know that you need that bolt, that M8 by 1.25 bolt. You need that thread in order to go in to be able to give you something to hammer on to drive out the existing cutter head, as well something to hold on to while you're trying to align the bearings. Also, of course, the snap ring pliers. Now, you don't need them, but it sure as heck makes things a lot easier. And then, of course, there's regular things such as Phillips screwdrivers and Allen key wrenches. A lot of you should already have those in your shop, but be aware that there are some things that you may not have that you will need. So don't plan, if you're planning on getting one of these, don't plan on buying it and installing it that day. Make sure you check into it and know what it is that you need. I will say that the instructions for installation on this unit are horrible. Absolutely horrible. Spelling mistakes, dark pictures, hard to understand. They tell you to screw a bolt in and all of a sudden you realize you don't have that bolt. That's that M8 that I was talking about. Just very, very vague instructions and very, I don't know, they're not the best instructions in the world, but the cutter head seems to be just fine. Hopefully those of you out there will be able to use this as a tutorial instead of trying to fumble through those written ones. But that seems to be the case in general when it comes to installations and manufacturer's instructions. And guys, as you saw, the cutter head drastically reduces the noise of the planer. And I know they're new blades, so there's no chipping, but that piece of poplar, after going through with the helical cutter, that thing is glass smooth. So I'm hoping that this is going to last quite a while. And of course you have 4 blades that you can rotate in case the one gets chipped or broken or whatever. And the cutter head did come with a spare 5 blades and 5 bolts to install should one get destroyed or chipped or broken or whatever, because they are fragile, those little blades. Either way, guys, this was a great installation, a lot of fun. You gotta really pay attention though when you're driving in those bearings. That smaller bearing, you need to drive it in. After you have it flush and you get the larger bearing installed, you really need to drive that bearing in that much further to expose the retention ring for that snap ring on that side. So that's something to keep in mind, that just because you get it flushed, like what I said in the beginning, you're not done. You need to drive it in later to flush it up and to shore it up with that retention ring groove that goes around the inside. Either way, guys, I think this is as expensive as it was. I think it's going to serve me well. Time is going to tell, and you'll probably look for a review of this in future after I get a chance to use it a bit more. Guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. This was one of those projects that I wouldn't normally do. I wouldn't normally change out stuff like this, but I'm glad I did. I'm looking forward to using it in the future, but even more, through the experience of installing the cutter head, you get to learn the inner workings of your tools. So if you ever have to do maintenance on it, you know how to access it. Not only that, but after seeing the manual and how to install this thing from the manufacturer, I'm glad that I'm able to bring you a video tutorial to maybe clear up some of the questions that you may have after reading the manual. If you haven't already, guys, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. You click the bell and that you won't miss notification of future episodes of the show. I hope you've enjoyed today's content. I hope you're going to try this for yourself one day. And honest to goodness, I hope you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another Alternative Tuesdays.